You know that moment when someone younger asks you what life was like back then, and for a second you don't even know where to begin. You remember life before the internet, before smartphones, before everything was instant and always connected. You remember calling someone and hoping they were home. You remember getting lost and having to figure it out without a map on a screen. You remember being alone with your thoughts more often. And yet somehow you learned how to live in both worlds. You adapted. You picked up the new tools. You kept moving forward. From the outside, it can look like you're just naturally tough or unbothered, but what looks like toughness is often just years of learning to handle things quietly, and there's a deeper reason that mindset stayed with you. For a long time, this probably just felt normal. You handled things on your own. You didn't always talk about what you were going through. You didn't always expect someone to step in and fix things. You figured things out as you went, sometimes by trial and error, sometimes by just pushing through. And if you've ever wondered why you're like this, why you don't panic easily, why you don't always open up right away, you're not the only one who feels that way. You're not strange for it. You're not too distant. You're not emotionally shut down. You just grew up in a time that quietly shaped how you deal with life now. Here's the part most people miss. Growing up when you did meant learning independence early, even if no one directly said that was the goal. Parents were often working, life was busy, the world was shifting, and there was this unspoken expectation to manage yourself, to figure things out, to be responsible. You learned how to solve problems before you fully understood them. You learned how to sit with discomfort without always explaining it. And over time, your brain built a simple pattern. Handle it, keep going. Don't stop. Not because you didn't need support, but because support wasn't always immediate, so you became your own backup system. This is where it gets psychologically interesting. When a habit forms early in life, it becomes part of how your mind works. It shapes your reactions. It shapes how you see stress. It shapes how you respond when things go wrong. You became very good at staying steady. You can handle pressure. You can deal with uncertainty. You can keep functioning even when things feel heavy. And from the outside, that can sometimes look like you don't feel things deeply. But that's not true at all. It's more like you learn to keep your emotions organized, quiet, contained. You don't ignore what you feel. You just don't always show it right away. There's a reason this feels so natural. Back then, talking openly about feelings wasn't always encouraged in the way it is now. Being responsible was valued. Being practical was valued. Keeping things together was valued. So instead of expressing everything out loud, you learned to process things internally. Your mind got used to sorting through problems in private. Think about it like this. Some people grew up learning to speak their feelings. You grew up learning to carry them, and carrying became second nature. Now here's something most people don't talk about. You're one of the only generations that clearly remembers life before and after a major shift in how the world works. You saw technology change everything. You saw work change, communication change, daily life change, and you had to adjust in real time without a guidebook. You didn't grow up with the systems that younger people rely on now. You had to learn them as an adult while still holding on to the values you started with. That creates a very specific kind of mental space. Part of you still prefers simplicity. Part of you learned to survive in complexity, and you live somewhere between the two. This is where it gets interesting again. You can understand older generations because you remember how things used to be. You understand why they value stability, routine, and patience. But you can also understand younger generations because you learned the new systems too. You figured out the technology. You adjusted to the pace. You kept up. You became the bridge without even realizing it. The person who can exist in both worlds. The one who can translate between what was and what is. But standing in the middle can sometimes feel a little strange. Not ignored exactly, just quietly overlooked. Here's the part most people miss. Being independent for a long time can make it hard to notice when you're carrying a lot, because you've been doing it so long. You just keep going. You don't always stop to think about how much effort it actually takes. You don't always pause to ask yourself how you're feeling. And that's not weakness, that's conditioning. Your brain got used to solving problems instead of sharing them, staying calm instead of reacting, moving forward instead of stopping. There's a reason this feels confusing sometimes. You care deeply about the people around you, family, friends, work, responsibilities. You show it through what you do, through consistency, through being there, through showing up again and again. But you might not always say it out loud. Not because you don't feel it, just because that wasn't always the language you were taught to use. You learned that love can look like responsibility, care can look like reliability, support can look like staying steady, and sometimes that gets misunderstood. People might think you're distant or private or emotionally reserved, when really you're just grounded. You don't react quickly. You don't speak before you think. You take things seriously. And in a world that moves fast and talks loudly, that quiet steadiness can be easy to overlook. Here's something else that sits quietly underneath it all. You've lived through a lot of change. You've seen jobs change. You've seen the cost of living change. You've seen expectations shift. You've watched the world speed up in ways no one predicted. And every time you adjusted, you kept working, kept building, kept adapting. You didn't always stop to process how much that takes out of a person, but your mind noticed. Your habits noticed. That's why stability feels important to you. That's why you value reliability. That's why you don't take things lightly. You've seen how quickly things can shift. This is where it goes a little deeper. When someone has spent most of their life being the dependable one, they don't always think of themselves as needing support. They think of themselves as the support. And over time, that becomes part of who you are. You're the one who figures things out, the one who stays calm when things get tense, the one who handles what needs to be handled, even when you're tired, even when you're stretched thin, even when you don't say anything about it. And most of the time, you don't question it. You just keep going, because that's how it's always been. You learned early that life keeps moving whether you're ready or not, so you learn to be ready. You learn to stay steady. You learn to keep things together even when you weren't sure how. Here's the part most people miss again. You didn't just learn independence, you learned responsibility at the same time. You learned that people depend on each other, that actions matter, that showing up matters. So even though you're comfortable standing on your own, you also carry a quiet sense of duty. You don't always say it, you don't make it dramatic, but it's there. And that can feel heavy sometimes, not in a loud way, in a quiet way, like a constant background weight you've gotten used to carrying. You don't complain about it, you just adjust your posture and keep moving. There's a reason this feels so familiar. Your brain learned that strength means continuing, that being steady means being reliable, that being dependable means being needed. And over time, those ideas settled into your identity, not in a forced way, just naturally, quietly, slowly. You became someone people can count on, and that's not something small. But here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. When you're always the steady one, people don't always think to check if you're okay. They assume you've got it handled. They assume you don't need much. And you've probably gotten used to that too. You don't expect a lot. You don't ask for much. You just keep doing what you've always done. This is where it gets emotionally complex. Because on one hand, you're proud of being strong. You know you can handle things. You know you can survive tough moments. But on the other hand, there are times when you might feel like no one really sees how much effort it takes, and you don't always say that out loud. You just keep going. And that quiet endurance becomes part of your story. Here's something else that's important to understand. You didn't grow up in a time where everything was constantly shared. You didn't grow up posting every feeling or every thought. Privacy felt normal. Having your own space felt normal. Keeping certain things to yourself felt natural. And even now, that sense of privacy still feels right to you. Not because you don't trust people, not because you don't want connection, just because you value your inner space. Your mind got used to having a place where you could think, process, and reflect without noise, and that space became part of how you stay balanced. This is where it gets interesting again. While the world got louder, faster, and more connected, a part of you stayed rooted in that quiet. You learned the new systems, you used the technology, you adapted, but deep down, you still understand the value of stepping back, of slowing down, of not being constantly available. And that's not resistance to change, that's balance. You carry both worlds inside you, the slower one you started in and the faster one you live in now. And maybe that's why you sometimes feel like you don't fully belong to either side. You understand both, you can function in both, but you don't fully identify with either. You're the middle space, the bridge, the steady ground between two different ways of living. And there's something quietly powerful about that. But it's also easy to overlook because it's not loud, it's not dramatic, it doesn't demand attention, it just exists, steady, consistent, reliable.